Today's webinar, Deep Dive into Education for Sustainable Development in the Curriculum. I would now like to introduce today's facilitators. We have Charlotte Bonner, National Head of Education for Sustainable Development, the Education and Training Foundation, and Graham Hastings Evans, Chief Executive of the NOCN Group. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Madhvi. It's really nice to join you this morning. A lovely sunny day in Scarborough in North Yorkshire. It's really nice to see so many of you from across the country join us. The only thing I need to add to the introduction before we get started is that it would be really helpful for participants to have with them a mobile phone. We're going to be using a platform called Mentimeter as part of the webinar today to collect your thoughts and ideas a couple of times throughout the next hour. So if you have a mobile phone close by, that would be really, really great. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, we've got four main objectives. Really want to talk through education for sustainable development and how it appears in the professional standards for educators in the sector. They've been recently revived, and Education for Sustainable Development, or ESD, has made its way to those for the first time. And then we want to look at what does that look like in practice? How do we bring ESD into our teaching and learning practices? We're going to spend some time developing ideas in terms of how you can bring ESD into your work. And we'll also signpost you to a number of tools and resources to help you with your ESD work. I'm really pleased to be joined by Graham. He's going to be talking a little bit about NOCN's approach to ESD2 a little later in the session. So let's kick off. The new professional standard, they were revised earlier this year, and professional standard number 2 now is for educators to promote and embed education for sustainable development, or ESD, across learning and working practices. I'm going to try and keep light on the acronyms today, not use too many, but ESD will be used throughout. So ESD, Education for Sustainable Development. And I think the inclusion of this standard in the 2022 revision really shows that sustainability is of critical importance to the further education, training and skills sectors. Our sector has a really valuable role to play in the achievement of sustainability. And we'll come on to look a little bit at the ESD landscape later on. But in terms of what this actually means, I think for a lot of people, ESD is quite new. There's some fantastic practice going on across the sector, but for many educators, this isn't a concept, this isn't an approach to teaching that has been part of their initial teacher education or as part of their professional development to date. So we really wanted to give you an opportunity today to really understand, what does this mean? What's its potential? What does it look like in practice? So in terms of ESD itself, Education for Sustainable Development is all about the learner. It's all about how are we equipping learners to be able to make informed decisions and take responsible actions in their lives and in their careers that really help support economic integrity, environmental integrity, economic viability, and a just society. And I think the sustainability challenges, and indeed the sustainability solutions that we have currently in 2022, are going to look really different from the challenges that we have in society across the world in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, so on and so forth. So a key part of ESD is really engaging learners in that approach to recognising that this is a lifelong attitude, this is a lifelong skill set, rather than kind of something you can tick a box and say, we've done that. So that lifelong learning piece is really integral, and I can see a number of adult education providers here on the call today, which is great to see. And increasingly, ESD is seen as a quality part of education, as a really integral part of quality education. And that's why the professional standards have included this new ESD recognition, and increasingly why policy documents, frameworks, systems within which we operate are bringing a sustainability lens too. So I suppose the key message here is that education for sustainable development isn't all about the bins and the light bulbs within your organisation. They're of course important, but really education for sustainable development is about how we're equipping learners. What do they need to be able to contribute positively to sustainability in their lives and in their jobs? And I think the potential for our sector to contribute to sustainability outcomes, positive sustainability outcomes, is really humongous. And I think that's from three perspectives, really. And one is just our reach. There's 5 million plus learners that are studying or undertaking an apprenticeship within the further education, training and skills sector at any one time. And if we can prepare those learners to be literate about sustainability issues, to have the right behaviour set to be able to contribute to those sustainability challenges positively, and the right value set to want to engage with sustainability in their lives and their jobs, that's a huge impact that we can have. And of course, we're also the pipeline for some of the really technical solutions to sustainability too. And the term green jobs is bandied about a lot at the moment. Everybody has a slightly different definition, but there's definitely roles within industry that are going to be absolutely critical to our achieving sustainability outcomes and the sustainability targets we've set as a country. So whether this is the kind of people that are working in energy systems or water management or agriculture or transport systems, for example, the FE training and skills sector is often the home of where those people develop their skills, develop their trade. And so we have a critical role again to play in helping develop that pipeline, build that workforce for those technical sustainability jobs. And then finally, I think the FE and training sector has a really close link to the communities that we serve. I think one of the reasons that people work in FE and study in FE is to stay close to their local community. And I don't think we should shy away from the fact that a transition to sustainable futures will mean that certain industries and certain jobs become more obsolete, become redundant. And we need to manage that really well so that nobody's left behind and so that those transitions is really helping communities prosper and thrive. And so I think really understanding what your local skills landscape looks like. Are there jobs at risk as a result of transitioning to sustainable futures? And how do we make sure that people in those jobs have the opportunities to reskill, upskill, transition into a different industry that's aligned to what they currently do to ensure that transition is just and fair and communities and people prosper is a really critical one. And I think the FE and training and skills sector is one of the key partners in making sure that that happens. So the potential for ESD in FE is really significant. And at the Education and Training Foundation, where I work as National Head of ESD, we have a vision for the sector that looks a little bit like this. And that is using our sector to contribute positively to society's sustainability needs. And to do that, we're developing those specialist skills, but also recognising that all learners can be sustainability learners in terms of developing those green life skills, the ability to affect change around them, and also recognising that there isn't really an industry or a job that won't be affected by sustainability at some point in the coming decades. And so to achieve that, we want to make sure that the workforce across the sector is well equipped, both in terms of their knowledge, but also their capacity, like how much resource is given to this, to embed ESD well in their subject. And we want to make sure that ESD is inclusive for everybody, for all learners as well. And I want to just go back to that professional standard to say, well, what does this actually look like in practice? This is all very well and good saying, you know, all learners should be sustainability learners, but what does this mean from an educator perspective? What does this mean from a curriculum perspective? And as part of the revised professional standards, we mapped out kind of what does this look like in practice for either an early career teacher or somebody who's new to ESD. And really it's about understanding the value of ESD and its importance for your learners. What does this look like for a more experienced teacher or somebody who's more advanced in their ESD practice? Well, that's about modelling sustainable practices at work. It's about collaborating with others to develop and embed ESD approaches within your organisation. And then what does this look like from an advanced position? Well, that's really about becoming a champion and an advocate for ESD with your peers, with your partners, and helping others to promote and contribute to ESD too. And really, this is going to be the focus of my part of the webinar this morning, is looking at, let's unpick this in a little bit more detail. Let's understand what this looks like in practice. So as I said, we're going to be using Mentimeter. So this is time to get your phones out get your thumbs out. And what I'm going to ask you to do is open your normal web browser, your internet browser, and go to menti.com, as you can see at the top of your screen there, menti.com. I'm going to do it too, so I know roughly how long it takes. And when you get to menti.com, you'll be asked to enter a code. And again, that code is at the top of your screen here, so that you can access the right Mentimeter for our session this morning. So I'll just give you a few moments to join Mentimeter, and then you'll be asked a question. What types of knowledge, skills and behaviours do you think that a sustainability learner needs to develop? So if we're thinking about what kind of learner outcomes we want to see so that learners can contribute positively to sustainability in their lives and in their jobs, what are those KSBs for learners with regards to sustainability? And at this stage, we're not really thinking about subject-specific knowledge, skills and behaviours, but more universal ones. Although if you've got a particular subject specialism that aligns, then feel free to chip in too. If you've got any issues with the Mentimeter, just stick a little hands up in the questions box and we'll see how we can get on. But let's hopefully see a few starting to come through now. This is brilliant. Wonderful. I can start to see things coming through now. Isn't Mentimeter clever? It always amazes me how we can be all over the country and contributing in the way that we would perhaps with post-it notes or on a flip chart in a room if we were all together. So thank you so much for those that are starting to come through. You'll see it will continue to move as people contribute. So thank you. So you can see some things here that are around the knowledge piece, and I can see quite a few understand sustainability, understand the change, understanding the system, understanding sustainability, awareness of impact. So there's really kind of a knowledge piece here around kind of the core concepts, I suppose, of sustainability, of their contributions to it. Whether that's their own personal contributions or perhaps the contributions of the industry that they're working in. So definitely some knowledge around the kind of the core concepts of sustainability, of resources, of the meaning of sustainability, and of the system within which they operate. And then there's some skills here. Let's have a look how to speak up, how to communicate well. Effective communication comes up an awful lot actually as I look at this. Leadership skills. Leading by example, having confidence. So you'll see that these skills, I personally, I can completely see how these immediately would contribute to people's ability to engage with sustainability, but they're not specific just to sustainability, are they? I mean, I'm sure that many of you are already developing your learners' communication skills, their critical thinking skills, their team building skills, for example. So this isn't perhaps something new. This is perhaps a new framing for those skill sets that you're developing. So this isn't just useful, good communication skills isn't just useful, with regards to this subject matter, but it's also a useful skill to be able to talk about sustainability with various different partners or with stakeholders or with colleagues or with your management teams and so on and so forth. I think we'll come on to that kind of explicit link between broader skill sets and sustainability later on. And then similarly from behaviours perspective, let's have a look at some behaviours. Being a champion of change, what a great behaviour there. And I'm trying to pick out a few more. I wish it colour coded them for me. It's not quite that clever, isn't it? The ability to question. That's a skill, isn't it, rather than a behaviour. So we've got slightly fewer behaviours there, perhaps. How to share ideas, how they can contribute. But I think this is really valuable, just really reinforcing that ESD isn't just about the bins and the light bulbs. It is about creating and helping your learners develop these kinds of attributes, these kind of characteristics, so that they are empathetic, they're passionate about sustainability, they're motivated to do something about it, they have the core knowledge that they need, and they've got the skill sets that help them contribute positively too. Thank you so much for your contributions there. We're going to collect these, and as part of the slides that we share with you at the end of the session, you'll have that kind of record, because I know it's difficult to see when it's moving about a lot and when the text gets smaller as there's more contributions. But you can see that it's that kind of holistic approach to sustainability that I think we need to be thinking about in terms of how we design our curricula. What are these universal ESD attributes, and how do they interrelate with those kind of more technical sustainability skills that are critical for certain jobs, for certain career pipelines. So I wanted to think a little bit about the curriculum and the kinds of ways that our learners learn whilst they're with us. And some of that is through the formal curriculum. Now, what's in your qualification specs? How have you translated that into a curriculum for your learners, perhaps in partnership with the employers that they're working with? You might be an employer, so how do you develop that formal curriculum with your education providers? What's taught in the classroom or on the job? What's in the formal curriculum? And we'll come on to building sustainability outcomes into that curriculum a little later on. But I wanted to stress that that's not the only way that learners pick up knowledge and skills and behaviours. Some of that's done through your co-curriculum. So perhaps you provide different activities, events for your learners to engage with. Perhaps you provide tutorials, careers information, advice and guidance. Perhaps you host clubs and societies. There's all sorts of ways alongside that formal classroom teaching that learners can engage with sustainability and other topics too. And then there's also what's called the subliminal, or perhaps the hidden curriculum. And this is where the bins and the light bulbs actually do really come into play, because this is what norms learners adapt to when they're a student with you, when they're a learner with you. So what do they see as the normal? What do they see as the cultural kind of priorities within your organisation? When they turn up on day one, do they see an organisation that is committed to sustainability and sustainable practices and think, okay, this is a norm that I'm going to adapt to? Or do they see an invisibility when it comes to sustainability? No narrative about it, no visibility, and therefore it's invisible to them and not important. So I really want people to be thinking about, okay, we're going to spend the most of the session today looking at the formal curriculum, but there are definitely opportunities through your co-curricular and through your subliminal curriculum too, to really build that culture of engagement with sustainability through your learners' whole experience with your organisation, not just with what's taught in the classroom. And what's taught in the classroom at the moment is varied. As I said at the beginning, there's definitely some really fantastic examples of effective practice for ESD and good practice for ESD across the country. But at the moment, the majority of that isn't coming from qualification specifications. We did some research last year. We did an audit of enrolments across the country, and specifically we looked for strong ESD content in the curriculum the qualification specifications that are used across the sector. And there's about 6,000 different qualifications. Unfortunately, we didn't have the resources to do all 6,000, but what we did is we looked at those that had the highest footfall, which qualifications have the most learners enrolled upon them, and where's the ESD content in those curricula. And what we found was a fairly bleak landscape, if I'm completely honest with you. We found that only 3% of learners were enrolled on a qualification with some ESD content within the qualification specification. And only 1 in 200 learners, so right down to 0.5%, were studying a qualification that had any significant ESD content within them. And of those, 9 out of 10 of them were studying either geography or environmental science A levels, which is where at the moment a lot of sustainability content is housed. And it was a fairly blunt audit. We're very open about the methodology we used. It was keyword searches, and we used the ILR records, the individual learner records, to find out who was enrolled on what. And so it was a fairly blunt study, but I think it does show that at the moment the qualifications landscape is slightly behind the curve in terms of really including the kinds of content that learners need to be able to develop their sustainability knowledge, skills and behaviours. A lot of you on the call today will be apprenticeship providers, and I've seen, I think if you'd done a similar study 2 years ago of the occupational standards, you would have got similar results. You know, there's very little ESD coverage. But IFATE have done a very thorough, oh, they're still underway, it's not finished, but they're very thoroughly reviewing the occupational standards, the occupational maps, to understand where is sustainability in those standards and what does it look like from a KSB, from a knowledge, skills and behaviours perspective. And what I've been particularly impressed by is they haven't just come up with a sentence for each that says, you know, your apprentices will understand core concepts of sustainability and have decent sustainability skills to contribute to them. They've really thought about, what does this look like for a plumbing apprentice? What does this look like for a hairdressing and barbering apprentice? What does this look like for somebody working in financial services, for example? So it's really industry specific. But at the moment, that isn't the case with a lot of qualification specifications. Different awarding organisations are taking a different approach. But what it shows is that if we want to develop those knowledge, skills and behaviours in our learners, we probably need to be thinking about, how do we contextualise the curriculum, the qualification specifications that we're using to develop those learner attributes that we looked at in the last exercise. And this data is published, it's on our website if you want to do a deeper dive into what's currently there in curriculum specifications. Then that data is available. I'm very happy to talk through it in more detail with anybody that wants that insight. So what we see when we look for examples of good quality ESD being delivered across the sector is we see this contextualization. We see people picking up their qualification specifications and thinking about, how do we bring sustainability into this work? And we've got a growing number of case studies available on our website. I'm always on the scrounge. If any of you on the call today think, I'm already doing some of this, or one of my colleagues is doing this really well, I would love to hear from you to help contribute and build this growing number of case studies. But what we're trying to do is develop a real portfolio of stories that showcase where people are building sustainability into their curriculum with different learners in different learner levels, from different subject specialisms and across different provider types as well. So here on the top left, I mean, these are all just taken from our web pages. Again, the URLs there on the slide. But whether it's looking at the foundational learning students at Wiltshire College, they've been developing those foundational learning skills, those foundational life skills through developing a business. They have a kind of enterprise woven into the heart of that course. They're lucky enough to have an orchard. I mean, not everybody has an orchard as part of their education provider setup. I appreciate that. But they use the windfall apples. They started to pick the apples. The learners they procured a fancy pants apple press. They're making juices, they're making chutneys, but they're learning about teamwork. They're learning about numeracy skills as they're selling those, both from the college directly, but also through local business partners. They're developing their language skills as they do the marketing of those products. They're learning about food safety and hygiene as a result of working with the apples and the products that they make. And fundamentally, they're also learning about sustainability. They're learning about food systems. They're learning about food waste. They're learning about what sustainable business looks like, sustainable business practices. So, you know, the foundational learning curriculum qualification specifications doesn't say, you know, your learners need to know how to make chutney, but they're using that project as a way to contextualize and bring to life what is in their curriculum specifications and really building sustainability into the heart of what they're teaching. There's other case studies here that look at accountancy, that look at hairdressing, that look at ESOL learners, that look at construction learners, and I'm sure that Graham will talk a little bit more about the construction perspective later on today. We've probably got close to 24 case studies now. So depending on what kind of provider you work for, what kind of curriculum you teach, then do go and have a look at those case studies. And like I say, if you've got examples that you think could enhance our suite of stories, then we'd love to hear from you, and we'll make it as painless a process as possible. But what we see across those case studies is the emergence of a number of trends and a number of themes that are common across those case studies. So I'm going to talk through a little bit about those because they're the more universal aspects, I suppose. So the first thing is really about making your sustainability content explicit. We know from research that we've done that 2/3 of educators in the sector, or at least 2/3 of people who responded to our survey about the sector, told us that to some extent they were already bringing ESD into their teaching and learning practice. But when we ask learners, and we haven't done this, but other organisations have, when you ask learners about what ESD content they've been exposed to or that they've got through their education, it's much, much lower, less than 1/3. And so I think there's a disconnect between intent, in terms of what educators and practitioners intend on developing with their learners, and whether learners or not appreciate that and understand that, and whether that's a kind of an explicit part of what they understand their knowledge, skills and behaviours to be. So I think it's really important that we start to flag where ESD is being done with our learners. We're developing our teamwork skills today. This is useful for X, Y and Z. X could be, workplace expectations. Y could be for collaboration and the impacts of diversifying viewpoints and so on and so forth. And Z could be, and this also helps you develop solutions to sustainability. So really making it explicit where ESD content is for your learners, so that over the course of their experience with you, they feel that they've had that holistic ESD experience. Another trend that we've seen is around solutions focus and really being proactive about thinking about the actions and the solutions to sustainability challenges. When you learn about sustainability challenges in their breadth, and we haven't, that wasn't the nature or the focus of today's webinar, but if you think about some of the environmental challenges, the social justice challenges, the economic inequity across society, both in the UK and globally, it can be quite a bleak landscape. It's not a particularly motivating landscape sometimes to think about the depth and the breadth of the challenges that we face. And unfortunately, I've seen very well-intentioned educators talk about those challenges and let people know as part of developing their core understanding of the core concepts of ESD and sustainability. And students leaving feeling demotivated, scared, disinterested because the scale of it feels too much. So actually having a solutions focus, these are the challenges, yes, and this is what the solutions look like. And this is how you can contribute to those solutions at your own individual level, at a group level, and this is how collectively we affect a broader systems change. That solutions focus is what motivates people to think, yeah, I can contribute to this positively. And it removes, or at least mitigates, some of those kind of feelings of apathy or demotivation or fear. There's a growing recognition that anxiety from environmental issues particularly is very high amongst young people. So having that solutions focus and letting people know how they can contribute, and also how you're contributing to build that collectivism, I think is very important. Another trend that we see across the case studies is about bringing local perspectives to the ESD work that they're teaching. So, sustainability is very much a global agenda, a global initiative. If you're not familiar with the kind of the nuances of what sustainable development is all about, I thoroughly recommend going to explore the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They really nicely outline what sustainability is about and how those environmental, social and economic issues are interrelated. But it can all feel very theoretical, quite conceptual, and something that is for other people as a result of that kind of global nature of it, I suppose. So really thinking about how do we make this meaningful for our learners? How do we make it local? How can they see these issues in their local environment? So that might be done through site visits. That might be done by inviting external speakers from the local community in. It might be from asking them to research sustainability challenges within their local area, whether they're environmental ones, whether they're social ones, so on and so forth. But really helping people understand the global issues, yes, but think about it from a local perspective so it's meaningful, so it's got relevance, so it's something that they can relate to. is definitely a theme and a trend we've seen across those case studies of effective practice. And then from a kind of a more pedagogical perspective, we've seen lots of examples of students learning by doing and students learning by leading. So whether this is projects and activities where students have the choice of what to focus on, whether this is a student voice piece and students being given the ability to affect a change within their education provider, whether this is student-led activities where they're kind of given role plays or scenarios to use to really understand the sometimes complexity of sustainability, but also how they can contribute to those solutions. We've seen an awful lot of those in the case studies, some really innovative examples. I was talking to a journalism lecturer last week who all of their students have to make a documentary as one of their projects. He's like, I'm going to just make it about a sustainable, they still got to make a documentary, that's still the assessment, but the focus is going to be about a sustainability challenge in our local area. And just that slight shift in framing means that students have a whole choice of what they focus on. They're still developing their journalism skills, but there's a real focus on sustainability that they can then bring into group discussions, they can bring into the students' research, so on and so forth. So lots of student-led activities and projects, lots of role plays and scenarios. And then the other thing that we're starting to see more of is just that link to enterprise and entrepreneurial skills, helping learners develop their business nous, I suppose. So one of the case studies that was from Michael John Training, the hairdressing and barbering school, they're equipping their learners to set up their own salons, but they're also equipping their learners to do that responsibly in terms of what kind of energy setup they have, what kind of products they're buying, what their waste management systems look like, and so on and so forth. So whether it's kind of students setting up their own enterprises as part of the course, like at Wiltshire College, or whether that's equipping them to have those business skills to set up their enterprises after their qualification, there's lots of work being done to kind of really build those links between sustainability and sustainability business, sustainability business practice, and the core concepts of whatever the subject specialism is that people are teaching. So those are some of the trends and themes that we're seeing as part of the case studies that we're collecting, and we'll continue to analyse them and build on this list as those case studies come in and as we learn more about what people are doing, and also as people trial and test things. You know, there isn't a one set way of bringing sustainability into your curriculum. I'm sorry, there's no easy fix, but you know, as people trial and develop different things, we'll learn more and more about the sector, and we very much see ourselves in a role of a very lucky role, a very privileged role of being able to collect some of that knowledge and share that back out with the sector. So we've talked a little bit about some of the effective practice that's already going on. I want to share another resource with you that's available through the ETF website, and this is a subject specialism guide. And here we've taken 30 plus different subject areas that we know are prolific across the further education skills and training sector. And we started to put together quite a high level guide to help educators think about, well, how can I put this in my curriculum in a way that's meaningful for our learners? Because learners don't want to learn about art and design and sustainability. They don't want to learn about public services and sustainability. They don't want to learn about plumbing and heating and sustainability. What they tell us repeatedly is we want to know about how is this relevant to what I'm here to do? How is this relevant to the kind of decisions I'm going to have to make and the kind of activities I'm going to be doing in my future job? And so this guide is here to help educators think about how do we build this in a way that's meaningful. So under each section, there's links to relevant case studies. We've already talked about some of those, but there's also some prompts and some ideas and some suggestions of the kind of content that you could be building into your curriculum that's relevant to your subject, but also helps develop understanding of sustainability issues. We've also included signposts to resources that you can adapt and adopt where they exist, and also links to external organisations who specialise in sustainability and your subject. So for example, in the sport category, there's an organisation called the British Association for Sustainability in Sport. They've got heaps of information that's really relevant to sports and sports science and sports and nutrition and so on and so forth that you can go and explore. Similarly, in health and social care, there's an organisation called the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. They have a huge number of resources education packs, information about what's going on across the health and social care sector that you can engage with. We didn't want to duplicate, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so those signposts are there. So if this is fairly new to you, or you want to broach this with a broader range of colleagues within your provider, this is a really good starting point. It's not going to fix it for you, it's not going to give you all the solutions, but it's going to get you down the right path to start thinking about how can we build this into our curriculum. Okay, so I'm going to go to Mentimeter again, and we're just going to have a little think about the kind of resources that you can be using to bring ESD into your teaching and learning practice and into your curriculum. And I'd like to ask you, not with a sustainability hat on, but just with your normal teaching, education, training hat on, what do you think makes a good teaching resource? Again, the code should be the same on your Mentimeter. It might still be open on your browser if you're lucky. If not, you can put it in again. But what do you think makes a good teaching resource? Great. Starting to see a few of these things come in. So the stretch and challenge, so you know how to adapt it and adopt it for different learners. Again, I can see the word adaptable there, which is great. Enjoyable, engaging, so something that students enjoy using. It's got relevance, it's based in real life projects. It's effective, that's a helpful one, isn't it? Like, it's a useful resource that has an impact. This is all really helpful. The reason that I've asked you this is that there is an absolute plethora of teaching resources available to you that build sustainability teaching resources. There's bucket loads out of them out there. And at the moment, there isn't a way of quality assuring those. There isn't a body that's quality assuring sustainability teaching resources. It's something we're exploring as part of the National Climate Education Action Plan, which the ETF is part of. But there's a lot of things out there. And, you know, we know it's what pretty much everyone does, isn't it? If you want to find something, you have a little Google, you see what's out there. And so I just wanted to have a conversation really about what should you be looking for in your sustainability resources if you're looking for inspiration, or if you're looking for resources to adapt and adopt. And so all of the things that are on this screen is really helpful in terms of guiding what you should be looking for, particularly from, I think, a pedagogy perspective, particularly from an impact perspective, particularly from a kind of a student engagement perspective, which are all obviously absolutely critical. I think one thing that I would add to this with a sustainability hat on is really thinking about the science basis, the evidence base behind the resources you're using. Is the science that your resources uses or references, is it up to date? Is it accurate? And I think there's an awful lot of misinformation. You know, we live in a world of misinformation and fake news, and the sustainability world is one that is rife with conflicting viewpoints. So really making sure that your sustainability resources are absolutely science-based, authentic. You know who wrote them and what their mandate is really critical. And the other thing, I think, and a lot of people have already said this in the word cloud we can see here, just making sure they're inclusive, they're accessible, they're easy to understand, and that they're impactful, you know, that they are impactful. And that's something that I think there is less work going on at the moment across the sector in terms of understanding what the impact of our ESD work is, and that's something we're very much working on in terms of monitoring trends, monitoring learner responses, monitoring skills gaps cited by industry, so that we can start to see what's impactful and what's not from a teaching resource from an ESD perspective. But from a teaching resource perspective, like I say, when we know of good quality resources, you will find them in our subject specialism guides, you will find them in our resources pages. But there's plenty of things out there. So just I suppose kind of just an encouragement to take that critical viewpoint. Are the resources that you're looking to use? Yes, we want them to be interactive, we want them to be relevant, we want them to be fun and engaging, we need them to be inclusive and accessible. And we also need to make sure that they've got a sound science basis behind them, because there's a lot of disinformation out there. Yeah, unfortunately. So I'm going to move on again. Got two more things to share with you before we hand over to Graham. So one is just thinking about creating sustainable education spaces. And this is really thinking about that subliminal, hidden curriculum piece that we talked about earlier on this morning. And just different ways that you can do that. You can build that culture of making sustainability really visible and part of the norm of how your education provider, how your teaching and learning is delivered. So some of that is around, I'm going to start, where shall I start? Well, we've just come off the back of resources. Let's start down there in the bottom right. So some of it is about your use of resources. And that might be, yes, teaching resources. And I did see as part of the word cloud, somebody said paper free as one of them. So really think about what sort of resources are you using? Are they used efficiently? I mean, I'm not one to say we need to get rid of paper. I'm a big, I'm surrounded by lists, I'm surrounded by books, but thinking about what kind of norms does your use of resources promote across your learners? Are you being efficient with your paper use? Are you being efficient with your digital use? Are you thinking about what kind of materials you're using, where they're coming from, how they're sourced, but also their end of life as well? What does this look like when they're disposed of? And just really walking the walk, I suppose, with the teaching materials and resources you're using to build that expectation with your learners too. Some of it from that is again about personally modeling sustainable practice. How do you show to your learners that this is something that can be built in into your day-to-day? This could look, it's very multifaceted, isn't it? The ways that you can contribute to sustainability in your personal lives. It might be something really simple, like making sure you've got your reusable cup on your desk rather than your paper Costa cup. It could be about the ways that you manage site visits, or the ways that you coordinate placements in terms of how far people have to travel. There's all sorts of things that you can do in terms of the operational aspects of your teaching and learning practice. Some of it is around whole organisation approaches and actually working not just alone on your ESD work, but with the rest of your organisation. How are you building this? Yes, into your teaching and learning practice, but also into the way that you operationally work. What does your waste management structures look like? What's your energy efficiency strategies? This is where the bins and the light bulbs come into play. But you can use some of those changes or some of those things that you're engaging with as a whole organisation as what's called living labs. And I really like this concept. This is where you use the work that you're doing within your education provider as a real life teaching tool for your learners. Engage them in what you're doing. Maybe you've got HR administration business apprenticeships. How do you involve them in thinking about what kind of people practices you've got to raise staff profiles around ESD or sustainability? Perhaps you're thinking about installing some solar panels. Well, get your electrical engineer students to be a part of that project. How do you use the changes in the work that you're doing at a whole organisational basis as a living laboratory for your students so that they can engage with the work that you're doing too? And that really helps make your work visible. If you change your waste management supplier, or if you change the source of your electricity, nobody's going to know that unless you tell them. So how explicit is your sustainability work? How visible is it to your learners? When you make a decision, when you change something, are you telling people? We've recently changed our stationery supplier at the ETF. We haven't told anybody yet, so nobody knows that we've put a lot of effort into making sure that our stationery is coming from an ethical, responsible source. We need to do some internal comms work around that with our colleagues. So how do you make your work visible? Because that all contributes to that subliminal, that hidden curriculum, which is a key part of ESD too. There's one more tool that I'm going to share with you before I pass on to Graham, and that is this. This is about mapping where you're at and monitoring change. So this is a really simple tool that we've developed to help individuals, teams, departments, whole organisations think about where is education for sustainable development currently in your curriculum. What does that look like? Where are the hot spots? Where are the cold spots? What kind of sustainability topics are you including? Which ones are you missing? What kind of skills are you developing in your learners? And through a conversation with colleagues, perhaps with your learners too, you can start to map out why your current ESD practices. And then the spreadsheet very fancily turns it into a nice dashboard for you to see some of those key metrics that you can use to monitor change over time. And I think the earlier you do this mapping, the better, even if the answer is actually there's not much across our organisation yet, or there's not much across my teaching and learning practice yet. You can start to see where the opportunities are. You can start to see who's doing this well, how you can learn from them. You can start to monitor your change, kind of understand the impact of your work over time too. So I've signposted you to an awful lot of research support that's available, some of which we've mentioned already today. They've got little arrows next to them. But in terms of making sure that we are providing people with good stories about effective case studies, about research and insights that will help inform your ESD work, tools and practical resources that you can pick up and use to get started or to further your ESD practice, a host of different articles and podcasts to help you explore some of the things I've talked about today in more detail. All of this is available. And then we've got in the making a number of CPD courses that help people develop their mastery of ESD in more depth than we're able to go into on a webinar format. But there's quite a lot in development as well as a new community of practice around sustainability. And we also offer bespoke support as well. So I just wanted to flag that there's a whole host of things available to you from ETF, but we also signpost to third parties and partners, because we're not the only players in this space by any means. And we want to make sure that people that work in the FE and training and skills sectors have what they need to be able to develop their ESD practice well. So you can find all of that at our website. You'll get a copy of these slides anyway, so there's absolutely no need for you to scribble away. And you might also like to join our ESD mailing list. So I don't write a regular newsletter for the sake of it. We only use that mailing list when there's new resources or new information from across the sector that people might like to know about. So I'm going to now hand straight over to Graham, who's going to talk a little bit about NOCN's work in this space too. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you, Charlotte. Very thought-provoking set of slides there. I think I'll pick up on one point. There's lots of people have different definitions of what sustainability is. The UN has one, and the British government has a sort of smaller, tighter version of what it is. But sustainability has a very, very broad meaning beyond net zero, although I think a lot of the rhetoric is around net zero. Sustainability is broader than that, and I'm going to touch upon that. But I'm going to start really, we are the EPAO with the largest coverage of standards in the UK. So I'm going to start with apprenticeships and IFATE. I think the IFATE concept of the light green, the medium green and the dark green to try to describe the impact of sustainability on different occupations, different jobs that are then built into the apprenticeship standard, I think is quite a good, it is a nice way of doing it. There's obviously an occupation that is virtually 100% linked to sustainability. There's then groups of occupations which have to change quite significantly in order to achieve the sustainability aims of the government, and that might be your plumber that you talked about, and your heat engineer and others as examples. And then there's the impact, which is probably less on each occupation, but it's general. We've all got to take on board the use of new technologies, digital learning, and those sorts of things. So I'd like to touch on some of those examples. I think it's a really good way of approaching it and describing it. However, I think there's a slightly, there's another dimension to those, that colouring, and that's the need at the operational level, at the operational occupation is different. So the curriculum for a frontline worker is different from that from their supervisor, and is different than that from their strategic leadership in their sector. So I think we have to realise it's there's two dimensions to those colours, and to be able to provide qualifications, support, short courses, etc. for all of those. I think we've also got to understand that we're only producing a few 100,000 apprentices each year, and we've produced hundreds of thousands so far since 2017 on the new standards that haven't had those sort of components on sustainability built into them. So we can change the standards now, and we can introduce new standards for occupations that are sustainable, that look strongly linked to sustainability, like a retrofit apprenticeship standard, for example. And we, NOCN, are working very closely with employers and IFATE on those types of changes, so that our EPAs can work on the new jobs, as well as have assessments within them for the new sustainable components within the existing jobs, like plumbers and bricklayers and the like, lab technicians. It's not just about construction. However, we at NOCN, we will continue to do that and work with IFATE. We actually think the biggest challenge is the 32 million people that are in the workforce, and obviously the apprentices that have come out to date. And therefore, the approach that we are taking is to have short, small qualifications or larger qualifications in as appropriate, that support that upskilling of the existing workforce, upskilling of the apprentices that already come through the system. We think that's probably the biggest area where support is needed in terms of sustainability, and we're taking that approach. And we're looking at the major sectors where we think that sustainability impacts. So that's utilities. I've got a water example here. That's all about river water quality, beach pollution. Lots in the news about that, isn't there? Coastal protection as we get erosion, flood relief, again, lots and lots of things. So we're looking at those sorts of areas. In energy, another utility, obviously energy conservation, renewables. We're working on the nuclear power station at Hinkley Point, and we'll do something similar at Sizewell C when it comes off. So we're looking at the utilities and how we can support those. We're looking at waste management. You know, your dustbin vehicle, it disappears every week, and you must wonder what happens to it. There's big issues there around sustainability and recycling, so how to support those. And clearly construction, and with it engineering, offsite manufacturing, major impact in terms of sustainability and net zero, because there's a whole approach to the way that you design and build our physical assets that we either live in or we use, roads and airports and power stations and all of that. And some of those jobs are going to be new jobs, heat pumps, solar panel installers, offsite manufacturers, retrofit, those sorts of things. But each job is going to have its component, as IFATE has recognised, of actually needing the skill to add on, as well as all the things that are going to be common, the use of drones and fintech, health, social care, all are going to change by digital learning. So what NOCN has started to do, and many of you will have seen, is to start to produce a whole range of qualifications that sort of support what IFATE's doing on the apprenticeships and support the upskilling agenda. And more of those are going to come out during September. So please keep a lookout on our website and come to some of the events that we're going to organise in October, November to explain NOCN's approach to supporting sustainability and net zero within our economy. Thank you very much.
Such a good point, Graham, particularly around the existing workforce and the opportunities that presents for FE and training skills providers across the country, from a commercial perspective as well. You know, really contributing to supporting that workforce.
Yeah,
I think it's really
there's really great opportunities for private training providers to actually provide that upskilling support for help members, as well as colleges. But certainly there's an enormous opportunity if you get yourself lined up for it.
Yeah, agreed. Lovely stuff. There's not been any questions that have come through during the session, so I just want to give people an opportunity, if you want to, if there's anything that you'd like us to cover in more detail, or that you'd like to pick up or challenge, then we very much welcome those through the chat box. Let me just get over there. Sorry, there we go.
We've got
Hi.
one question. Hi.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. Great. So we have an attendee who's pulling together a curriculum development toolkit, and they've researched tons of resources, but they're looking for something that helps academics to review their curriculum and how to identify sustainability teaching and learning. So if you could help with any good resources that they could point academics towards, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a curriculum mapping perspective, in terms of reviewing a curriculum, then I would I would point to our own curriculum mapping tool, the one that I outlined just a few moments ago. But it's specifically from an academic perspective, there's a model that's been developed as part of a European project, and I'm really desperately trying to remember what it's called, because this is very embarrassing that I can't. But it's a really great tool that's come from a number of academics across Europe who've come together to think about what does this actually look like in depth. And what I'll do is I'll make sure there's a link to it in the slides that we share with you following the conversation today, because unfortunately I've only had 2 cups of tea this morning and I can't bring it to the front of my brain. So there is definitely stuff out there to help people, whether that's from a mapping perspective, whether that's from an analysis perspective. If you also deliver higher education courses, then the QAA have an ESD guidance document for academics too that I'll make sure is in the follow-up to the session as well. So there's quite a few things out there that hopefully will be able to help.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte.
We've obviously been writing a lot of qualification specs, which have obviously got curriculum advice in it. So if you want to email me, I'll put you in touch with our team that's working on that. That might be a help for you as well.
That's great. Thank you, Graham. Right. We do not have any more questions here, but if there is anything that comes to anyone's mind, please feel free to email the webinar team and we shall refer back to Charlotte and Graham then. But yeah, thank you. I think that was, as Graham said, was thought-provoking, and thank you everyone as well for attending today's webinar. And a quick reminder, if we do have a selection of webinars on offer, we have added some onto the future webinar slide. So to see the full lineup, please visit our website. We also have a number of sector forums coming up, which are member exclusive and complimentary to attend. As members, anyone from your organization can access the AELP member benefits. So that's including the weekly countdown newsletter and Ask Asheroth. So if you need any assistance at all, please contact our admin team. And we have our AELP CD&I Summit on the 29th of September in central London, and the Autumn Conference on the 1st of November at the Midland, Manchester. Hoping to see you all there, so please save the date. Once you leave today's webinar, a survey will appear on your screen, and we'd be grateful if you could spare a minute or two to complete that, please. And on behalf of myself, Charlotte, Graham, and the webinar team, thank you so much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Happy weekend.
Thank you very much, everybody.